Mr. Williams, thanks to your skill, you've given me and my men a new lease on life. From now on, you can count on our loyalty, Marshall said sincerely. There's no need for that. As long as you stay out of my way, we'll be fine, Kevin replied quietly. He really didn't want to have anything to do with the alliance now that he knew about its violent and sinister reputation. Before we go, I have some advice for you, Marshall slowly explained. You have an unusual skill that's highly valued by some very rich and powerful individuals. The ability to make these herbal supplements could draw attention from the wrong people. He continued in a very serious tone. In order to get their hands on your methods, they would be willing to use any means necessary. You have to think of your family. Make sure that you're well protected. Otherwise, you may end up in the hands of some vile people. Marshall suddenly stopped and said to Kevin ominously, Mr. Williams, please think about it carefully. I'm a lightweight compared to these bastards. Kevin frowned when he heard this. If Marshall was trying to scare him, he was doing a good job. Kevin had gotten a taste of what was going on behind the scenes in business, politics, and the criminal underworld. He had to do something to keep Lily and their family safe. Thank you for your advice, Kevin said appreciatively. I'm glad you're going to listen to me, Marshall said candidly. Now I'll take my men to get more of the black fruit for you. After he said this, Marshall headed out the door. Kevin returned to the dining room and saw that Lily, Rachel, and Phoebe were still tied up. Are you okay? He asked them anxiously. Kevin, what's going on? Who were those men? Lily asked curiously. Nothing to worry about. They were looking for the wrong person, but I straightened it all out, Kevin said calmly. Before Kevin had a chance to untie the three women, they all heard the sound of the front door opening. It was Truman Anderson, Phoebe's father. He stood in the doorway with a shocked expression on his face. Kevin, what are you doing here? Then, as he looked over and saw his daughter and the other two women tied up with belts, Truman became infuriated. What the hell is going on here? Truman shouted at the top of his lungs. Truman, this isn't what it looks like, Kevin tried to explain. It's not what it looks like, Truman thundered. What the hell do you think it looks like? Kevin tried to answer, but he had no idea what to say. How could you do something like this to my daughter? Truman yelled as he threw his briefcase at Kevin. Lily wanted to explain that this wasn't Kevin's fault, but Truman wouldn't listen to anyone. He was so furious. Phoebe tried to stand up so she could explain what had happened, but because she had been tied up for so long, her legs had gotten numb. As she tried to get up, she winced and cried out in pain. This only made Truman even angrier. He raised his trembling hand and pointed at Kevin, growling, I can't believe I trusted you to work in my company. Please, this is all a misunderstanding, Kevin explained as he helped Truman to sit down on the sofa. Then he immediately went over to the three women and undid the belts that were still tied around their wrists and ankles. Kevin felt that it was hopeless to try to explain, so he just took Lily and Rachel and left the house. Truman was still trying to catch his breath. He turned to his daughter and asked her, Phoebe, tell me honestly, did Kevin do this? Dad, what are you talking about? You've really misunderstood what happened, Phoebe reassured him. After taking a moment to catch his breath and compose himself, Truman finally said, Phoebe, I only know what I saw. Dad, can you please listen to my explanation? Phoebe said slowly. A bunch of hoodlums broke through the front door while we were making lunch. They tied us up and tried to beat up Kevin. He was about to explain the rest to us when you came in. But believe me, it wasn't Kevin's fault. Truman still wasn't convinced, but he trusted his daughter. Well, if you say so, but that's not what I saw. His voice trailed off as he tried to accept her explanation. Dad, you still don't believe me? Phoebe said in an exasperated tone. She stomped her foot on the floor in frustration. Her father had Kevin all wrong. He was a huge help with her appraisals, and he even got someone like Drake to back down and leave the store peacefully. Actually, even though she trusted Kevin, there was still something mysterious about him. Truman let out another long sigh. He wasn't sure what to think. While this was going on, Kevin was driving Lily and Rachel back into the city. He simply didn't understand Truman's reaction when he walked into the house. "I didn't know Truman had such a quick temper," Kevin said to Lily. "What are you talking about?" Lily snapped at him. "The whole thing was your fault." "How could it be my fault? I didn't tie you up," Kevin said helplessly. Rachel, who had been very quiet until now, suddenly said, "It's getting late. Just drop me off at the corner up ahead. I'll call for a ride home." Before Kevin could reply, Lily said, "Don't worry, Rachel. It's no trouble at all. Kevin can take you home while I stop by the market to buy some vegetables." Lily then turned to Kevin and asked him, "What do you want for dinner? I'm cooking." Kevin was very shocked to hear her say that. They'd been married for almost 3 years and he couldn't remember when Lily had ever offered to cook. This put Kevin in a good mood and he quickly headed for the market. When they got there, Kevin said to Lily, "Wait for me here after you're done. I'll pick you up right after I drop Rachel off. It shouldn't be too long." Lily nodded in agreement. Then she said a few words to Rachel and slowly got out of the car and walked into the market. That left Kevin and Rachel alone in the big Porsche sedan. When Lily was there, Rachel always felt a little more at ease, but when she was alone with Kevin, she immediately clammed up, unsure how to act. "Don't be too nervous. I'm not that scary," Kevin said with a smile as he pulled out of the parking lot. "I'm not nervous," Rachel replied quickly, but she really was anxious. Ever since she found out about Kevin's true identity, every time she thought about how she'd always treated him, she felt a little ashamed and regretted her actions. Kevin glanced at her in the rearview mirror. He had an idea about what she was thinking. "Don't worry about the past. You and Lily are good friends and you were just protecting her because you thought she was suffering with me." "No, I didn't," Rachel replied so quietly he could barely hear her. "I know you're good for Lily, so I want to give you some great news," Kevin said with a grin. Then he continued, "I'm getting ready to open the biggest hotel in Chicago, and I've decided to ask you to be the vice president." "Really?" Rachel replied excitedly. "Of course it's true, but I need to know soon, so please don't take too long to decide," Kevin said very casually. He'd already made an agreement with Mitchell Cook. The two of them were going to join forces and go into the food and beverage industry in Chicago. "Just don't disappoint me. And if you accept my offer, I'll give you 3 times the industry standard," Kevin added. Rachel was dumbfounded and stammered. "Am I dreaming? You really want me to be the vice president?" "There's only one condition. I want you to help me keep an eye on Lily. If any man tries to get close to her, you must let me know immediately," Kevin said very seriously. "I won't let you down," Rachel replied excitedly. At that very moment, at the Jones mansion, Grandma Jones was sitting with the top members of the family. She looked despondent. "I called everyone here today to discuss something that's very important for our future," Grandma Jones said weakly. "Lily now has a controlling share in our company. Does anyone have an idea what we can do about this?" Grandma Jones had been miserable ever since Tyler gave Lily 60% of the company's shares. Lily had instantly replaced her as the most important member of the family. But what could Grandma do about it? Jason was the first to offer an option. "Grandma, I feel that Lily simply doesn't have the expertise to control so many shares." The rest of them agreed with Jason. Some of them even wondered if Oliver and Lily had somehow colluded with Tyler Dawn to grab a controlling interest in the family corporation. But they also thought it was better to have the shares in the hands of a member of the family and not under the control of an outsider. Even so, hardly anyone spoke up in Lily's defense. "That's water under the bridge," Grandma Jones said gloomily. "What we need to figure out is how to make Lily hand over the shares." When she said this, the entire room fell silent. Suddenly, Jason's eyes lit up. He slowly stood up and said, "Grandma, I have an idea, but I'm afraid you won't agree." "What idea do you have? Tell me." Grandma Jones' face brightened. Maybe she had been right to put her trust in Jason. He always seemed to come up with a solution. "Grandma, You can talk to Lily nicely and ask her to give you some of her shares, Jason said with an evil smile. Even if she gave me 10%, she would still have half the shares, Grandma Jones said hopelessly. Jason said, Don't worry. When Lily signs the transfer paperwork, we can slip another document underneath the contract. Before Jason finished speaking, they all knew what he meant. It was devious, but it might work. I guess there's no other way, Grandma Jones sighed. Then Jason added, Grandma, don't forget that Tyler Dawn gave Lily an import-export company. This was actually what Jason hated the most. He really didn't know why Tyler had been so generous to Lily. Grandma Jones perked up when he said this. If she could get back the company shares, she could start another company and finally put the Jones family back on top. 5 days later, in the CEO's office of Williams Media, Kevin looked intently at the documents on his desk. Mr. Williams, as soon as the market opens this morning, our company's shares are expected to drop by 20%. Miss Wilson reported with a serious expression. What's behind this? Kevin asked as he looked at the documents and then at his computer screen. About 3 days ago, someone started to manipulate the shares of the largest companies in Chicago, Miss Wilson explained. Kevin sat back slowly in his chair and muttered, I can't believe they were able to set this up in just a few days. It must have taken a lot of work. Mr. Williams, do you know what happened? Miss Wilson asked in surprise. Ever since Kevin took over Williams Media, he hadn't been very active in his role as CEO. He had been busy with a lot of other things, from antique appraisals to herbal supplements. Miss Wilson helped to keep things going smoothly, as she always did. But she never dared to complain. Nobody had figured out yet who was behind the manipulation of the markets. But Miss Wilson never thought that Kevin, who was hardly ever in his office, would know anything about the matter. Please go down to the first floor and wait. We'll have a few important visitors stopping by, Kevin said very calmly. Yes, sir. Since Kevin didn't give any more details than that, Miss Wilson naturally didn't dare to ask who they were. After she left, Kevin slapped his desk and took out his phone to make a call. Hello, Kevin, what's the matter? Thomas answered coldly. Uncle Thomas, you know very well what's the matter. There's no point in hiding it, Kevin said coldly. His uncle was silent for a few seconds before he continued. That's right, Kevin. The Williams family did this. Why? Kevin asked him. He really wanted to know the answer. You know perfectly well why we did this, Kevin, Thomas replied coldly. Your performance lately has made everyone unhappy. Your grandfather thinks that you're getting carried away. You need something to bring you down to earth and keep you from following the wrong path. This is for your own good. How can you even say that? Aren't you afraid that I'll take back the $3 billion that I lent the family? Kevin asked him impatiently. Kevin, if you want your money back, I can transfer it to you right now. However, if you want to use it to save Williams Media, it won't work, Thomas said gravely. This is your grandfather's decision. I advise you to come back and apologize to your family. We can still work this out. It looked like Kevin didn't have any options left. When Kevin got to his office at Williams Media, he found out that the company's shares were about to tank. He suspected that the Williams family was behind the manipulation of stocks in the largest companies in Chicago. He called his Uncle Thomas to find out if he was behind it. The family wanted him to come back to New York to talk it out with his grandfather. Kevin didn't answer him, he just hung up the phone. Then he tapped on his desk while he thought about what to do. He couldn't understand how the Williams family had suddenly found enough money to do this. Their situation was desperate. After thinking for a while, Kevin decided to call Mitchell Cook, Adriana Wright, Gilbert Rhodes, and the others to come to an emergency meeting at his office. Within an hour, they'd all arrived. Mr. Williams, what's going on? Why did the Williams family suddenly launch this financial attack on Chicago? Adriana was the first to ask.
With their influence, they'll have no trouble taking over all the major industries in the city. But the way they're doing it, they'll destroy the entire economy, Cook said bitterly.
As the most prominent business leaders in Chicago, they naturally found who was behind this madness, but they didn't understand the reason behind it. Gilbert Rhodes suddenly stood up, looked directly at Kevin and asked, Mr. Williams, are they doing this to get even with you? It's useless to dwell on that now. The important thing is that the Williams family has already made their move, Kevin said stoically. Hearing this, Cook and the others were unsure how to respond to the threat. They were considered to be the most influential business leaders in all of Chicago, with enormous financial resources. But they still didn't have enough clout to stand up to the colossal financial power of the Williams family. They simply weren't a match for them. Let's not get pessimistic. The reason I called you here today is to discuss countermeasures, Kevin said confidently. Mr. Williams, just tell me what to do. We'll support you with all we've got, no matter what, Emo Squire said very frankly. That's right. Without you, we wouldn't be where we are today, Adriana said optimistically. Mitchell Cook and Gilbert Rhodes didn't say anything, but they nodded in agreement. Kevin thought for a moment and said, although the situation looks critical, it doesn't mean that the Williams family will definitely succeed. The first step we need to take is to stabilize the stock market. Kevin slammed his fist on his desk and said firmly, let's use our money to push back at them.
Kevin is right. We definitely can't avoid it. They're playing rough, so we will too. Even if it kills us, we'll make sure they don't get out of this unhurt, Mitchell Cook said forcefully. Within an hour of the meeting, everyone in the stock exchange was shocked. As everyone watched, the Williams Group stepped up and invested $3 billion. After that, Mitchell Cook, Adriana, and the others followed suit. Each of them took billions of dollars and poured everything they could into the stock market. The enormous transfers of funds attracted everyone's attention. When the stock market closed in the afternoon, they had managed to stabilize Chicago's financial position. Cook and the others promised that they would follow Williams Media's lead and match Kevin's actions. They vowed to protect Chicago's financial base, even if it cost them their lives and their fortunes. That night, the Jones family held a meeting in their mansion. How much of our stock fell today? Grandma Jones asked with a gloomy expression. Grandma, our shares dropped by 60%, one of her nephews said with a depressed look on his face. There was silence in the room while they tried to figure out how to respond. What can we do? If this keeps up, we may lose everything, Grandma Jones said with some frustration. This kind of economic war wasn't something that a small family could afford to be in. Grandma, I have a suggestion, but I don't know if everyone will agree, Jason said slowly. Oh, what do you suggest? Grandma Jones asked in surprise. Didn't Williams Media lead the way today? Why don't we take half of our shares and buy into their company? Jason explained carefully. That way, however this turns out, we'll at least be able to maintain half of our wealth. That's right. We can ask Williams Media for help, one of his uncles replied. But they still weren't sure if Williams Media would go along with this. They also weren't sure they'd be able to work together. Kevin, who was standing next to Lily, frowned slightly when he heard this. He instantly understood Jason's ultimate goal. Lily, what do you think about Jason's proposal? Grandma Jones asked gently. It's up to you to decide, Grandma, Lily said with a sullen look on her face. The Jones Corporation shares were dropping in value and they were practically bleeding money. They didn't see any other way to stop it. All right, since you said that the decision is up to Grandma, then you'll have to contribute 50% of the company's shares, Jason said deviously. Kevin stood up before Lily could say anything. Jason, what do you mean? What right do you have to make my wife turn over all her shares? 60% of the company's shares are now in Lily's hands. If she doesn't do this, then who will? Jason said with a sour look on his face. If she still considers herself to be a member of the Jones family, then she needs to do this right now. Everyone started arguing, claiming that the shares weren't really hers and that it was about time she did something for the family. The discussion got louder and louder. Quiet, Grandma Jones said loudly. Stop arguing. Then Grandma Jones looked at Lily and forced a smile. Lily, this concerns the survival of our family. Why don't you turn over your shares? In any case, don't you agree that it's not fair for them to be in your hands anyway? I don't agree, Kevin shouted. What did you say? Grandma Jones snapped back. Before Kevin could say anything, Jason jumped on him too. Kevin, don't think you're so special just because you know a few rich people. If you're so great, why don't you get them to bail us out? They all started to criticize Kevin again, complaining that he wasn't a true member of the family and had no voice in their meetings. Then Jason continued to explain his plan. Grandma, I recently met with a senior member of Williams Media. As long as Lily is willing to turn over her shares, I have a way to transfer them to Williams Media.
After the crisis is over, we can sell them and buy back control of our company. And how do we allocate the shares after that? Kevin asked loudly. Everyone stopped talking when he said this. Grandma Jones had an unhappy look on her face. Lily wanted to say something, but she just couldn't get herself to speak. Grandma is the head of the family. Of course the shares would go to her, Jason said very naturally. Jason, you have no shame, Kevin said loudly. How dare you disagree with me, Jason grumbled. From what you're saying, it sounds like Lily isn't willing to go along with this plan anyway. Just as Kevin was about to say something else, Lily tugged on his sleeve. Lily, what do you think we should do? Grandma Jones asked in a slow, calculating voice. Grandma, as long as you think it's appropriate, I have no objections, Lily said tensely. When she heard this, a smile immediately appeared on Grandma Jones's face. Jason's mouth also curled into a wicked smile and a proud expression flashed in his eyes. No, Kevin shouted. What did you say? Grandma Jones said as she looked at Kevin angrily. If we must use our shares for this transfer, Grandma, you should contribute 20% and my wife should give 30%. Moreover, after the crisis is resolved, the shares should revert to their respective owners, Kevin said matter-of-factly. How dare you? Grandma Jones yelled as she banged her fist on her armrest. Do you have the right to speak here? Get out! Grandma Jones stared at Kevin menacingly. This was the second time Kevin had contradicted her in public. If she didn't teach him a lesson now, she wouldn't have any control over him in the future. Kevin suddenly sneered and said, You people are really funny. What are you laughing at? Grandma Jones asked hesitantly. I'm laughing at the Jones family. You do consider yourselves to be a family, don't you? How could you be so desperate? Kevin sneered and continued. First, you want to use my wife and exchange her for Merriweather shares. Now that the shares are in her hands, you want to trick her into giving them back to you. Can't you see how funny that is? Everyone stared at him awkwardly, but none of them refuted him because they knew he was telling the truth. You bastard! Someone, throw him out of here! Grandma Jones screamed. Who's willing to take the first swing? Kevin said calmly as he looked around the room. Kevin knew they wouldn't try anything. They'd all seen how he pulverized Merriweather in just a couple of minutes. All right, Kevin, Lily said as she suddenly stood up and took him by the hand. She turned to Grandma Jones and said, Grandma, it's getting late. Let's talk about this again tomorrow. Then Lily led Kevin out the door. When Jason saw that Grandma Jones wasn't going to stop them, he didn't say anything. After all, Lily was currently holding the high cards, and right now there was nothing he could do about it. Lily, I'll let you and that useless husband of yours appreciate the moment, but when you lose your shares, I'll teach you a lesson, Jason thought to himself. As Kevin and Lily got into their car and drove away, no one said anything. When Kevin got to the office the next day, Miss Wilson had already been waiting for him for half an hour. What is it? Kevin asked worriedly. He couldn't let Williams Media fail, not when he knew that it would be so useful for him in the future. Sir, many of our senior executives want to have a meeting with you. Miss Wilson didn't answer Kevin's question directly, but he could tell from her serious expression that the news wasn't good. Okay, have them wait for me in the meeting room in half an hour, Kevin said thoughtfully. Next, Kevin checked the company's stock situation on his computer. As the markets opened, their share prices fell by 10%. By now, they had already lost hundreds of millions. Kevin sighed slightly and took out the bracelet that he'd bought from Reuben at Phoebe's antique store. What's the use? Kevin said with a slight frown. While he was turning the bracelet over and over in his hand, he started to feel more relaxed and confident. That's odd, he thought to himself. Then he took a closer look at the stone that was set in the bracelet. It wasn't a green emerald at all. It was actually a green tourmaline. How could he have made such a rookie mistake? But it did explain why he was drawn to it in the first place. Kevin slowly put the bracelet on the table. After thinking for a moment, he decided to call Officer Emmett to ask her opinion. After all, she had set him on the path to making herbal remedies. Maybe she knew something about this too. Hello, Kevin? What do you want? Officer Emmett answered in a surprised tone. I was wondering what you might know about green tourmaline, Kevin asked hesitantly. I was wondering when you might ask me something like that, she said frankly. A lot of people believe that certain stones can help you to focus your energy to relax or work on your health. Things like that. Interesting, Kevin smiled and said. I felt drawn to a tourmaline bracelet the other day at the antique store. What do you think? Why should I tell you? Officer Emmett said jokingly. I'm serious, Kevin insisted. I'll tell you, but you need to say please, Officer Emmett replied mischievously. Come on, I'm serious. Kevin was starting to get frustrated. He knew she was just teasing, but he didn't have a lot of time for this today. Come on, just once. What's the magic word? Officer Emmett tried again. Okay, please, Kevin said in a very low voice. I'm sorry I can't hear you. Could you speak up? Officer Emmett said in a satisfied tone. Kevin took a deep breath and said very clearly, Please. That's better, Officer Emmett said. Come to the downtown Luxbank's office in an hour. Don't forget to bring the bracelet. I'll explain everything to you then. See you later. She hung up before Kevin could say goodbye. Miss Wilson came into Kevin's office as soon as he put his phone in his pocket. Mr. Williams, all the senior executives are waiting for you in the conference room. Kevin nodded and left the office. This was the first high-level meeting that Kevin had held since he took over Williams Media, so a lot of them didn't have a great impression of his leadership abilities. As soon as he walked into the conference room, one of the vice presidents stood up and said, Mr. Williams, we can't fight this anymore. Even if we win, we'll suffer heavy losses. The executives were all panicked about what the Williams family was doing to their company. They were willing to give up and let them buy them out if that was what it took to save Williams Media. Kevin sat patiently and listened to them. Finally, Kevin's eyes swept across the room before he slowly said, Are you all done? Sir, I strongly recommend that we give in, one of the older, more experienced executives said firmly. How much money did the Williams family offer you to make you react like this? Kevin asked calmly. When he said this, the entire meeting room grew quiet. Kevin leaned forward in his chair and looked everyone in the eye one by one before he said, I came to this meeting today to tell you something. If anyone feels that fighting the Williams family is a mistake, please leave now. Then Kevin sat back in his chair feeling very confident and relaxed. He knew that they would get through this, but he just wasn't sure how. Kevin was meeting with the senior executives at Williams Media. They were panicking because of all the pressure the Williams family was putting on them. But Kevin was confident that they could get through this. When Kevin told them that anyone who wasn't up for the fight could leave, they were impressed by his attitude. All right, since no one has any objections, let's get to work. Kevin turned to Miss Wilson and said, You're authorized to transfer any amount of funds necessary. Our first goal is to stabilize the stock market as much as possible. After he said this, Kevin got up and left. He went straight down to the parking garage and got in his Pagani Roadster to drive to the downtown branch of Luxbank. When he got to the bank a while later, he was lucky to find some street parking. Kevin decided to leave the bracelet in his car before he walked inside. Because of the volatile stock market over the past few days, many people were worried about losing their life savings, so there was a crowd in the bank trying to withdraw their money. Kevin went straight to the VIP area because he figured Officer Emmett would be waiting for him there. But before he got to the teller's window, he was stopped by a staff member. Hello, sir. How may I help you? The woman said with a smile. I don't need any help, thanks, Kevin said. I'm just looking for someone. Judging by Kevin's clothes, the woman immediately determined that he was just an ordinary customer and wasn't qualified to go to the VIP section. Sorry, sir, these windows are reserved for VIPs. No one else is allowed in here. If you're looking for someone, you can wait over there by the door, the woman said icily. I also have some business to take care of. Can I go ahead? Kevin asked politely. Sir, you can go to the regular customer area to do your business, she said with a fake smile. Then the woman thought to herself, the customers in the VIP area are all worth over $1 million. Kevin, who was wearing sloppy ordinary clothes, probably didn't earn more than $20,000 a year. I'd like to make a withdrawal, Kevin said helplessly. He was starting to get irritated. You can make a withdrawal from the ATM by the entrance, the woman said impatiently. She didn't want to waste any more time with Kevin. Kevin frowned. He thought that he was pretty handsome. How come he kept getting this kind of reaction from people? Then he took a deep breath and looked at her name tag. I'll just stand here and wait, Miss Gray. It shouldn't be long, okay? No, sir. This is the VIP area. I'm afraid you're disturbing our customers, Miss Gray said in disgust. Please move along. Their conversation was starting to attract attention. The VIP customers were annoyed by his intrusion. How could a poor man like him dare to come into their private section? Kevin took another deep breath and said to her, You're giving me no choice. I've decided that I'm going to withdraw all my money from your bank. I'm sorry, but you don't seem to understand. There's an ATM in the lobby, she said impatiently. If you don't leave this area immediately, I'll be forced to have you removed by security. Miss Gray, I'd like to withdraw $2 million in cash immediately, Kevin said as he took out his bank card and slapped it in her hand. The VIP onlookers started to whisper to each other. Did he really say he was withdrawing $2 million? He's not fooling anyone. Just look at how he's dressed. She looked disdainfully at the bank card in her hand. There wasn't even a name on it. Just as she was about to throw the card out, the bank manager happened to walk by. When he saw the black card, he was so unnerved that his legs got weak.
Miss Gray, what's going on here? The manager asked her abruptly.
Mr. Johnson, this man has been causing trouble, she explained. Of course, she didn't forget to give Kevin a snooty look. Johnson was so angry that he muttered to himself,
We really have to do better training.
He paused and then explained,
This is a black card. There isn't another one in all of Chicago.
The VIPs who were watching the scene were shocked, and the employee felt incredibly awkward. Sir, are you sure you aren't mistaken? She asked hesitantly.
Nonsense, Miss Gray,
Johnson said as he took back the card and walked over to Kevin. He held the card carefully like it was a Fabergé egg.
Sir, my name is Evan Johnson. I'm the manager of this branch. It would be our pleasure to serve you,
he said apologetically, trying very hard not to let his voice quiver. In all his years working for the bank, he had never seen one of these cards. I don't need any help, thank you. I'm just making a withdrawal, Kevin said as he sneered at the rude employee. Am I qualified to stand here now? Sir, I'm so sorry, Miss Gray replied ever so politely. She was mortified. How could she have insulted a VIP customer?
Sir, please accept our apologies for this misunderstanding. If you need anything at all, please let me know, Johnson said with a big smile.
I've already told Miss Gray how much I'd like to withdraw, Kevin said nonchalantly. I'm sure she can handle things now.
Okay, Johnson said amiably.
Then he turned around and reprimanded her.
What are you standing here for? Take care of the transaction right away.
Yes, sir, she said as she walked behind the counter.
Sir, please, come with me to wait in the private room, Johnson invited him.
Their attitude had completely changed, and the VIPs who had witnessed the spectacle were speechless. When they got to the private room, Kevin sat down casually on the sofa and crossed his legs. Johnson smiled and walked over to the cappuccino machine and offered Kevin a coffee. A few minutes later, the embarrassed employee came into the room, struggling to carry a large canvas bank bag with both hands. Sir, the $2 million withdrawal you requested, Miss Gray said apprehensively. She could barely look Kevin in the eye. She was so embarrassed by how rudely she treated Kevin when he walked in. You know, I don't really think I need to carry around that much cash. How about if you take out $500 and put the rest back in the vault? Kevin said as he leisurely sipped his cappuccino. Yes, sir, she replied. She knew that Kevin was just screwing with her, but she realized she deserved it. Miss Gray would probably be a lot more polite to the bank customers in the future, VIPs or not. Kevin slowly walked out of the VIP room accompanied by Mr. Johnson and Miss Gray. He stuffed the $500 in his pocket. As he stepped into the lobby, Officer Emmett walked over to him and asked, Kevin, what are you doing here? Didn't you want me to meet you here? I figured as long as I'm at the bank, I might as well make a withdrawal. Kevin smiled. Officer Emmett nodded slightly, but then she noticed that Kevin was coming out of the VIP area. But what were you doing at the VIP window? Officer Emmett asked as she looked him straight in the eyes. She was here to do some banking too, but she had to do it at an ordinary window. Officer Emmett knew very well that the bank's VIP room was only accessible to millionaires. Maybe they let me use it because the regular lines were getting too long, Kevin suggested as he shrugged his shoulders. That seemed to make sense to Officer Emmett, so she decided to change the subject. Kevin, please don't misunderstand Blair's actions. He didn't do any of that on purpose. Before she could finish, Kevin interrupted her. I'm not here to talk about him. Let's find a place to sit down so you can explain to me what's going on with that bracelet. Suddenly, there was a scream from the lobby. We're being robbed! The bank's front door was kicked open by 5 men in black. One of them fired his gun at the ceiling and shouted, Everyone, on the floor! Put all your valuables on the floor in front of you and don't look up, one of the men snarled menacingly. The head bank robber shouted, If you value your lives, you'll do as we say. The shocked customers hit the floor and tried to follow the thieves' instructions. Officer Emmett was about to react, but saw that there were too many armed robbers and she didn't want any innocent people to get hurt. What a bunch of scum, she said to Kevin. Robbing a bank in broad daylight. Well, if they came here at night, there'd be nothing to rob, Kevin replied with a smile. How can you joke at a time like this? Officer Emmett grumbled. What else can we do? Kevin pointed out with a smirk. Should we go stop them? No, if they're brazen enough to come down here in the daytime, they're probably prepared for resistance. I'm guessing they're dangerous and desperate. Officer Emmett commented as she maneuvered to scan the room while she was still lying on the floor. There are too many innocent people here. We need to wait for a better opportunity. Kevin nodded in agreement when she said this. In fact, he wasn't sure he wanted to stop them because he was worried she'd draw him into another fight, like she did with the grave robbers over on Wacker Drive. Just then, the leader of the gang pointed a gun at the bank employees and snarled, Go to the vault and bring back $8 million in unmarked bills, and don't try anything you'll regret. The bank manager, Mr. Johnson, pleaded with them. Well, we don't have that much money right now. The robber responded by shooting Johnson in the thigh. He fell to the ground, grabbing his leg in pain and letting out an agonizing wail. I won't say this again. $8 million in cash right now, he yelled as he pointed his gun at Johnson's head. The customers and employees were frozen with fear. Too many customers have taken out their money the past few days, plus a lot of companies have withdrawn their funds to put into the stock market. We really don't have $8 million in the vault, Johnson said as he gritted his teeth in pain. One more word and you're a dead man, the robber said as he spat on the floor. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, Officer Emmett stood up holding her badge in her hand. Chicago PD, you're all under arrest. Put down your weapons and place your hands on your heads. Kevin, who was still lying on the floor, looked up at Officer Emmett and shook his head in disbelief. What the hell is wrong with her? Didn't we agree to wait for a better chance? Kevin thought to himself. All the men in black turned to look at Officer Emmett. The group's leader looked around the room and then looked back at her. Sure, officer. Then he paused and said, Wait a second. Why should we listen to you? Oh my God, I thought she had better judgment than this. No backup and no gun. Why should they listen to you? Kevin couldn't help but think. Just then, the brawny robber motioned to his accomplices. You two go and tie her up and throw her into the car. He started walking towards Officer Emmett while he said this. As the two men moved in to tie her up, Officer Emmett spun around and made a savage sidekick to the first one's gut. Then she spun in the other direction and threw a high snap kick to the other man's head. A gunshot rang out and dust floated from the ceiling. You're as good at fighting as you are beautiful, the man smiled creepily and said. Let's see which is faster, your foot or my gun. He pointed to all the people lying on the floor and threatened. We've got 5 guns. How many of them do you think you can save? You're a piece of crap, Officer Emmett shouted angrily. Kevin realized that she'd stood up and drawn their attention to keep Johnson from getting shot in the head. But now the robber was threatening everyone in the room. Kevin jumped up and said to Officer Emmett, Go and check his injuries. Leave these guys to me. When Kevin met Officer Emmett at the bank to discuss his Egyptian bracelet, They were interrupted by an armed robbery. Officer Emmett took out 2 of the robbers but stopped fighting when one of them threatened to start shooting the hostages. Kevin stood up to draw their attention so Officer Emmett could give first aid to the bank manager. By the time Officer Emmett realized what was going on, Kevin had already leapt in front of the man and kicked the gun out of his hand. Then he threw a lightning-fast punch to the man's head. He dropped like a sack of cement. The customers and employees were amazed and started to whisper to each other. "Do you think we're saved?" they wondered. Then one of the robbers asked him, "Kid, which gang are you from?" Another one tried to sound like he wasn't afraid. "Don't let him scare you. There's more of us than him." "Yeah, let's kill him," one of them said as he rushed towards Kevin. Then he reached out to grab Kevin's throat. Kevin quickly reacted and grabbed the man's wrist, squeezing it hard. The sound of his bones breaking echoed off the walls as the man screamed in agony. One of the other men came up behind Kevin with a switchblade, but Kevin saw him out of the corner of his eye and stepped to the side as the man lunged. Then he grabbed the man's wrist, crushing it so hard that he dropped his knife. While holding on to him, he turned around and threw him into the first attacker who was still holding his wrist. The 2 men dropped to the floor at the same time. There were only 2 men who were still upright, and one of them quickly pounced on Kevin, but before he could do anything, he was sent flying. "It's your turn," Kevin said calmly to the last man standing. The man was holding a gun, but he was so psyched out that his hand started to shake. He'd just seen Kevin take out his 4 accomplices in less than a minute. "Don't you have a gun in your hand?" Kevin said without changing his expression. "Go ahead and shoot. I'm not afraid." Kevin slowly walked resolutely towards the man. "Stay back," the man shouted as he saw that Kevin was getting close enough to reach him. In fear for his life, he started to aim towards the hostages. Kevin saw that the gun was pointed at a little girl who was lying on the floor next to her mother. He knew this wasn't good and sprang between the man and the little girl just as he pulled the trigger. Kevin suddenly felt a burning sensation near his waist. He took a deep breath and forced himself to stand up, enduring the intense pain. "I told you to shoot me. Why did you shoot at someone else? What the hell is wrong with you?" Kevin said as he gritted his teeth. "Don't you know how to rob a bank?" "Kevin!" Officer Emmett shouted nervously. She could tell that Kevin was doing this to distract the gunman and keep anyone else from getting hurt. "Why don't you put down the gun and face me like a real man?" Kevin said with a mocking smile. "Shut up!" the man yelled as he turned toward Kevin. But he was so nervous that he accidentally pulled the trigger again. But luckily, the man's shot was aimed at the floor and didn't hit anyone. In desperation, the man suddenly grabbed a little boy who was next to him. "If you say another word," but he didn't have to finish his threat. Kevin knew what he meant and didn't make a move because he was too worried that the kid would be injured. Now that the robber had hostages, he had to be careful. Kevin took a deep breath and said, "Let's talk this over." "Talk? There's nothing to talk about. You're going to stay right here and we're going to leave. Take another step and you'll regret it," the man roared. By now, the rest of the men were getting up off the floor. The one nearest to Kevin immediately hit him on the head with the butt of his gun. Kevin saw double for a second, and then he took a couple of steps back. "That's what you get for interfering," the man snarled as he spat at Kevin. Blood immediately started flowing down from Kevin's head. Fortunately, he was in pretty good condition, so the blow didn't knock him out. The gang's leader turned to his men and ordered them, "You guys go and put all the money in your backpacks." A minute later, the 5 of them ran out of the front door with 5 bags of money in their young hostage. After the men left, everyone was relieved, except the boy's father. And Officer Emmett and Kevin knew that it wasn't over yet. "Kevin, are you all right?" Officer Emmett asked Kevin with concern. "I'm fine," Kevin said as he tore off a piece of his shirt and tied it to his head to stop the bleeding. "Shall we chase after them?" "I'll chase after them. You get to the hospital," Officer Emmett said worriedly. She had been very impressed by Kevin's courage under fire. "I'll be okay. Let's go," Kevin said to her as he headed towards the door. "Those scumbags! They stole all that money and still took a hostage," Officer Emmett complained as she followed Kevin to his car. That boy is so young. Even if we manage to save him, I'm afraid he'll never get over it." She was right. The young boy was in grave danger. "They were probably afraid that the police would follow them, so they grabbed a hostage," Kevin said calmly as he drove after them. "Call 911 immediately and ask them to check the surveillance cameras along State Street. Also ask them to send backup, or I'm afraid we won't be able to save the boy." "I know. You do realize I'm a cop, right?" Officer Emmett replied as she was pulling out her phone to call the station. "Hello? It's Lieutenant Emmett." She gave instructions to the sergeant who took her call, and then she turned her attention back to Kevin, who had just been shot a few minutes ago. About 10 minutes later, the men thought they might be getting away with their robbery. As they raced up Fullerton, one of them said excitedly, "Man, we hit the jackpot this time."
Bullshit. We could have done a lot better. Who would have thought that such a big bank wouldn't even have a lousy $8 million? The man said bitterly.
Suddenly, the driver looked in the rearview mirror and started to panic.
"Hey man, we got a tail. I think it's the guy from the bank."
"Damn it! How's that even possible? Didn't you just shoot him?" another one said in horror.
"What are you panicking for? There are only two of them. Just him and that cop," the leader said coolly. "Just keep your foot on the gas and stick with the plan. As long as we get to the boat, we'll be fine."
He was acting like he was calm, but the panic showed in the man's eyes. Kevin had been shot and hit on the head, but he kept coming after them. What kind of man was he? "What if we get caught? How are we going to kill him?" one of them asked.
"We won't have to. Have you already forgotten what I told you?" the man answered grimly. "Maybe that guy can fight, but we've got a hostage."
While they were discussing their options, Kevin and Officer Emmett were coming up with a plan of their own. "Kevin, hurry up and drive faster. Let's not lose them," Officer Emmett said impatiently. She couldn't believe that she was actually chasing the suspects in a Pagani Roadster. It was probably worth more than what the robbers had stolen from the bank. "Don't worry, we're almost at the lake. They'll have to stop soon," Kevin replied as he focused on the big black car ahead of them. Then he thought for a second and said, "You'd better let your backup know that we're heading for the marina. I'll bet they plan to switch to a speedboat." He knew his car could catch up with them in 2 seconds, but if he got too close, he couldn't guarantee that they wouldn't hurt the hostage. Officer Emmett noticed the bright red stain on Kevin's shirt. She asked him earnestly, "How are you holding up? That looks pretty bad." "It's nothing serious. I can hold on for a while longer," Kevin replied calmly. "This probably isn't the right moment, but there's something I want to know." Officer Emmett stared at Kevin and asked, "You could have dodged that bullet, but why did you put yourself in danger like that?" Kevin didn't reply to her question. He just kept driving, keeping just far enough behind the robbers so that they wouldn't get jumpy. When they got near the marina, the men grabbed their hostage and ran from the car. Kevin put the bracelet inside his jacket. Maybe it could at least deflect a bullet. Officer Emmett and Kevin jumped out of the car. Just as they were about to catch up with them, the group of men suddenly stopped.
"Stay back or the hostage is dead,"
the head robber turned around and shouted. The thieves were getting angry. One of them said,
"If it wasn't for these two bastards, we'd already be counting our money." "We can count it after we kill them," the other man said optimistically.
"Cut the crap. Throw down your weapons, let the child go, and put your hands on your heads. This is your last warning," Officer Emmett shouted.
"Stay where you are," the leader hollered back. "Take another step and he's finished."
The man pointed his gun right at the kid's back while he used him as a shield. The little boy was seriously frightened and he couldn't stop crying. "Let the child go, you worthless son of a bitch," Officer Emmett growled. Kevin patted Officer Emmett on the shoulder and took a step forward. "So, you tough guys are using a child as a human shield. I'm really impressed. Very manly," Kevin said sarcastically.
"Shut up. If it wasn't for you, we'd have been out of that bank in 2 minutes and we wouldn't even need a hostage," the man said viciously.
In the past few years, he and his gang had committed dozens of robberies, but they'd never failed. Until now. Kevin had messed up their plans. "I'll tell you what. If you want a hostage so bad, take me," Kevin said in a very serious tone. When Officer Emmett heard him say this, she turned her head in shock. She looked at Kevin and didn't know what to say.
So, you want to be a hero. You got it, the gang's leader said angrily. Come on, raise your hands over your head and walk over here. Slowly. If you play any tricks, you know what I'll do.
As soon as the man finished speaking, Kevin started to sneer. He slowly raised his hands and walked toward him. Kevin! Officer Emmett shouted in shock. Before this incident, Officer Emmett would have never thought that Kevin would risk his life to save a little girl and then offer himself as a hostage for a little boy. Why did everyone in the Jones family keep calling him a bum? When Kevin was less than 6 feet away, the man let go of the little boy. The kid immediately ran towards Officer Emmett, still crying uncontrollably.
Come over here,
the man roared at Kevin. Don't worry, I didn't bring any weapons with me, Kevin retorted as he continued walking towards the man. Then Kevin made his move. He punched the man in the center of his chest and sent him flying backward. His men were shocked and they definitely didn't want to face Kevin again. They just snatched their leader and ran away as quickly as they could. After they were gone, Kevin grabbed his side and complained, Damn, this hurts. When he punched the bank robber, the wounds on his head and side had started to bleed again. Kevin, lie down and breathe calmly, Officer Emmett said as she carried the little boy over to him. Then she took off her jacket and held it against Kevin's side to stop the bleeding. Help is on the way, she reassured him. That's okay. I'll just lie here and bleed for a while, Kevin said jokingly. I'm sorry I got you into this, Officer Emmett answered quietly. She was feeling pretty guilty because she was, after all, a police lieutenant, but she had ended up letting Kevin do her job today. That's okay, Kevin said. It's not like I had anything else to do. Just hang in there, Officer Emmett said as she nodded her head. What are we going to do now? Kevin asked in confusion. Those guys are probably halfway across Lake Michigan by now. Even if you wanted to, I don't think you could catch up to them. They can wait. Let's get you some help first. I'll call the bank to let them know the kid's all right, Officer Emmett said calmly. That's all right, the little boy said. Just send me back to the bank. This man needs to go to the hospital. Kevin and Officer Emmett were stunned to hear the kid say that. I didn't know a child could have so much common sense, Kevin said in surprise. Me neither, Officer Emmett said with a smile. They relaxed a little when they finally heard the sirens approaching. The bank robbers got away in their speedboat, but Kevin and Officer Emmett managed to save their young hostage. Unfortunately, while fighting with the leader of the gang, Kevin reopened the wounds on his head and his side. As the police and ambulance approached, Kevin said to Officer Emmett, I think you should take the boy back to the bank. After all this, he needs to be with his family as soon as possible. I can wait, the little boy said stubbornly. You should get to the hospital right away. Officer Emmett patted the boy on the head and said, I'll send you back in a police car. How would you like that? Then she paused and said, You know, I don't even know your name. The little boy replied, I'm Stevie. Then his eyes lit up and he asked, Can they use the siren? Officer Emmett laughed and said, We'll see. She was trying to hide it, but she was pretty worried about Kevin's gunshot wound. Just then, the squad cars pulled up and a few officers walked over toward them cautiously with their weapons drawn.
Chicago PD, please identify yourselves, one of them said firmly.
You missed the bad guys by like 10 minutes. Where the heck were you? Officer Emmett said as she showed him her badge.
Oh, Lieutenant Emmett,
the cop responded as he put his gun back in his holster. Geez, you guys are slow, Officer Emmett said disapprovingly. Then she turned to the little boy and said, Stevie, these nice officers will take you back to your family. I need to get Kevin some help. Okay, Stevie said excitedly. At the same time, he didn't forget to wave goodbye to Kevin. Where's that damned ambulance? Officer Emmett asked one of the officers. As soon as she asked, she saw the EMTs running toward her and Kevin. I really don't need all of this fuss. I have a lot of work to do, Kevin said with a hint of irritation in his voice. When Officer Emmett heard him say this, she wanted to slap him. Your health comes first, Officer Emmett snapped at him. If you don't treat this wound now, you'll probably get an infection. That'll cost you even more time and money. Now let them check you out." "I still don't want to go to the hospital," Kevin complained. The lead paramedic introduced herself to Kevin. "I'm Erica Diaz. Just remain calm and we'll get you back on your feet in no time." She and her assistant examined Kevin's wounds and lifted him onto a stretcher to load him into the ambulance. When they checked his vitals, they were surprised to see that he wasn't in shock. "You're pretty lucky," Diaz said to Kevin. "It looks like the bullet passed right through." She rolled Kevin onto his side to be able to disinfect the exit wound. "I really don't want to go to the hospital," Kevin told her. This was an unusual request for this kind of injury, so Diaz thought for a few seconds and then answered. "I can stitch you up and give you some IV antibiotics, but I really recommend that you get it checked out to make sure it didn't hit any internal organs. It doesn't look like it did, but you never know." Then she examined the cut on his scalp and said, "Your head wound looks worse than it is. Fortunately, you're not showing any signs of a concussion." "Why don't you listen to my advice?" Officer Emmett said disappointedly. "Just let a doctor take a look." "I promise I'll go if it gets worse, but I just don't have the time to deal with a hospital right now. And I can't go home like this either. Lily would freak out," Kevin joked. "You're such a pain in the butt," Officer Emmett snapped at him. "Okay, you can crash out in my living room, but just for one night. Someone has to keep an eye on you. I guess it'll be me." Officer Emmett suddenly realized just how much she cared about Kevin. It was platonic, of course. After all, she had a fiancé and Kevin was a married man. Kevin got off the stretcher and thanked the paramedics as he stepped out of the ambulance. He and Officer Emmett walked slowly to his car, but she stopped him as he was about to reach for the driver's side door. "Oh, no, you don't," she said to him. "You don't think I'm going to let you drive in your condition?" Officer Emmett helped Kevin into the passenger seat and went around to the other side to start the car. She smiled as she revved the Pagani's powerful engine. They got to Officer Emmett's house in about a half an hour. When they walked into the living room, she pointed at the large recliner and said, "That's yours for the night." Then she went into her bedroom and came back with a first aid kit. "I'll leave this here in case you need it," Officer Emmett said as she put the box on the coffee table and put a blanket over Kevin. Then she pointed to a door next to the bookcase and added, "The guest bathroom is right over there." Once Kevin was settled into the comfortable recliner, Officer Emmett sat down on the sofa. Kevin's phone vibrated, but he ignored it. "Kevin, can you tell me what you were thinking when you blocked the bullet for that little girl?" Officer Emmett asked hesitantly. "I wasn't really thinking about anything. I just figured it would be less dangerous for me than for her," Kevin said thoughtfully. Officer Emmett was touched by this. Although Kevin was trying to make it sound like a rational decision, she knew he had a heart. This made her see Kevin in a new light. "It's been a long day and we both need some rest," Officer Emmett said sleepily. Then she took a deep breath and said, "You have free run of the living room and the bathroom. If you're dying, just knock on my door. Otherwise, I don't want to hear a peep out of you until morning." "Thanks, but your bedside manner could use some work." Kevin looked at Officer Emmett in shock. Officer Emmett turned around abruptly and headed to her bedroom. She closed her door and went into her bathroom to clean up. Kevin could hear Officer Emmett's shower running as he started to doze off. Just as he was almost asleep, his phone vibrated again. It turned out to be Phoebe Anderson sending him text messages. It looked like she'd sent him dozens of texts. Is there trouble at her antique store again? Kevin thought to himself. He decided to call Phoebe to ask her what was going on. Phoebe answered excitedly. "Kevin, you finally saw my messages." "It's been a busy day," Kevin replied matter-of-factly. "Is there anything wrong? Do you need my help?" Phoebe said with concern. "Oh, I didn't know that you cared," Kevin answered playfully. "Don't worry. It's nothing I can't handle." What Kevin didn't know was that Phoebe had actually blushed a little. Then Kevin suddenly thought of something. "Phoebe, since your family's got a lot of resources, have you seen any books about the healing powers of various gems?" "Why are you asking?" Phoebe asked uncertainly. "I haven't seen any, but my father has an amazing library. I'll go take a look and get back to you." She didn't hang up, so Kevin put his phone on the side table while he waited for her to check the library. Just then, Officer Emmett walked out of her room while drying her hair with a large towel. "Who are you calling?" Officer Emmett asked cautiously. "Phoebe Anderson. Do you remember her from the antique store?" Kevin smiled and said, "I wanted to ask her to help me find a book on rare gems." "I didn't expect you to be up making any phone calls. Where did you put that bracelet anyway?" Officer Emmett said in surprise. Kevin took the bracelet out of his coat pocket. The stone reflected the room's lighting beautifully. "It's magnificent," Officer Emmett exclaimed. "Do you want to take a look?" Kevin said as he held the bracelet out for her. Officer Emmett started to reach for it and then yawned. "You know, I think I should wait until tomorrow. I really need to rest first. Good night." Then she turned around and headed back towards her bedroom. She closed the door and Kevin heard a click as she locked it behind her. Kevin started to doze off again, and then he heard Phoebe's voice coming from his phone, which was still sitting on the table. "Kevin, are you still there?" He picked it up and answered sleepily. "Yup, I'm here. What did you find?" Phoebe answered a little nervously. "I found a couple of old books he probably got from an estate sale. Do you need them now?" "There's no hurry. I'll stop by tomorrow," Kevin said as he yawned. "Okay, it sounds like you need some rest. I'll see you tomorrow." Phoebe hung up the phone slightly disappointed. Kevin put his phone back in his pocket and fell asleep. When Officer Emmett woke up the next morning, Kevin had already left. Instead of heading home, Kevin went to his office at Williams Media. He sat at his desk looking at the information Miss Wilson had sent him with a gloomy expression on his face. In just one day, Williams Media had already lost over $3 billion. When the markets opened in the morning, the stocks dropped so fast that they temporarily halted trading. "Sir, if this continues, I'm afraid the company won't be able to hold on," Miss Wilson said worriedly. "Even if we can hold on, we have to try," Kevin said as he threw the stock reports on his desk. "No matter what, the company has to hang in there. How much liquid capital do we have available? I want you to access all of it. Let's see how far the Williams family is willing to go." "Yes, sir. I'll take care of that right away," Miss Wilson said reluctantly. She knew very well that Kevin's actions wouldn't help them at all. The Williams family was just too powerful, and Williams Media couldn't stand up to them without some outside help. In just a short time, not only Williams Media, but also the Whistler Hotel and the West Chicago International Group had suffered enormous losses. All over Chicago, countless small companies were facing bankruptcy. Kevin called Mitchell Cook and the others to come back to his office. They dropped everything and rushed there in less than an hour. "Why are you all frowning? We aren't bankrupt yet," Kevin said as he took a sip of coffee. "Mr. Williams, how can you laugh at this? The Williams family is killing us," Adriana said in exasperation. "Don't be so pessimistic. It ain't over till it's over," Kevin smiled. Then he asked Cook, "Mitch, what have you found out?" "According to what I've seen, the whole mess is being led by the Williams family. They have at least 20 other companies helping them," Cook said gloomily. "Mr. Williams, why don't we just give up now and cut our losses?" Gilbert Rhodes said worriedly. "What's wrong? Are you afraid?" Kevin teased him. "I'm just worried that when the dust settles, you'll end up losing Williams Media." Everyone at the table agreed. "I appreciate your concern, but let's not worry about that right now. I don't want to lose Williams Media either, but I can handle it if that happens. What we need to do now is to stabilize the stock market as much as possible. Don't let it crash before 3 this afternoon." A strong coldness flashed in Kevin's eyes. Then he said confidently, "We won't lose." The afternoon dragged on, while everyone watched the Williams Media and West Chicago International Group stocks fell again. But just when everyone thought that Williams Media wouldn't be able to last until the closing bell, there was a huge surge. Not only did it stabilize the stock market in an instant, but it also increased the shares of West Chicago International Group and the other groups by nearly 30%. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the major news agencies shared the breaking news. The CEO of KWTD Corporation, Tyler Dawn, had given his full support to Williams Media. The chairman of the Orion Group also said that he would back Williams Media. An unimaginable amount of money poured into the markets, and by the closing bell, their losses had been completely reversed. Williams Media stock had nearly doubled. "I must be dreaming," Gilbert Rhodes said excitedly. "That's thanks to the KWTD Corporation and the Orion Group." Adriana was so happy that she looked like she was going to jump in the air. "Two of the biggest players in the business world," Emos Squire exclaimed as he slapped his hand on the table. "We aren't the only ones who have been saved. It's spilled over to all the other companies in Chicago," Cook said excitedly as he stared at his computer screen. "I told you things would turn around," Kevin said as he sat calmly on the sofa with his legs crossed, sipping another espresso. "Mr. Williams, how did you get these two corporations to support you?" Adriana asked in confusion. "I can't believe you doubted me," Kevin said teasingly. They all felt a little embarrassed. Kevin put down his coffee and continued. "You don't have to worry about it anymore. I just couldn't give up on Chicago. It's too important. But I'll still need your help." He asked them to stay at Williams Media and keep an eye on things while he drove to Anderson Antiques to see Phoebe. Over the past few days, the Anderson family's antique and jewel business was the only place in Chicago that hadn't been directly affected by the Williams family's manipulation of the stock market. When Kevin arrived at the store, two assistants met him at the door and escorted him to the third floor. "Kevin, you're finally here. Do you know how long I've been waiting for you?" Phoebe said as she put down the book in her hand. "I'm sorry, Phoebe, I didn't know you were waiting this whole time," Kevin said apologetically. Phoebe saw that Kevin was sorry and her frown morphed into a pleasant smile. "What is it you're trying to find out?" she asked him. Kevin spent the night in Officer Emmett's living room as he recovered from his injuries from the bank robbery. The next day he went to his office and saw that Williams Media was still losing money. Things finally turned around after Tyler threw KWTD's support behind him. Kevin left Cook and the others to keep an eye on things in his office while he headed over to see Phoebe. "Is this what you were looking for?" Phoebe asked. He picked up one of the books and started to thumb through it. "Yes, thanks," he replied absently as he looked at the photos and drawings. "A lot of the stones are simply decorative," Phoebe Anderson explained. "But there are some people who swear that certain stones can help with different physical or mental ailments. What exactly are you researching?" "Nothing in particular, just a sudden interest," Kevin replied casually. Phoebe nodded in understanding. After a long pause, Phoebe looked at Kevin, who was lost in the book, and lightly bit her lower lip as she said, "I hope you're still not upset about what my father said the other day. Please don't take it to heart. He has a pretty bad temper, especially when family is involved." When she finished speaking, she couldn't look Kevin in the eye. It had been a pretty strange and embarrassing scene. She really couldn't blame her father for getting upset even though he was mad at the wrong person. "That's okay, Phoebe. It's understandable," Kevin said casually. Suddenly, Kevin put down the old book in his hand. After hesitating for a moment, he looked at Phoebe and asked, "After we left your home, did your dad say anything?" "What do you mean?" Phoebe asked a little tentatively. She really didn't want to tell Kevin about the awkward conversation she had had with her father after Kevin, Lily, and Rachel left. "No, nothing special," Phoebe stammered. "I explained everything to him as clearly as I could, and I think he felt better." "Oh, what did you tell him?" Kevin asked with great interest. Of course I told him the truth," Phoebe said quietly. Phoebe didn't know why she was having so much trouble talking about it. "That's a relief," Kevin said. "Thank you for letting me borrow these books." Then Kevin picked up the old guides and started to head for the door. Phoebe suddenly asked, "How about if I walk you downstairs?" Kevin gave her a quizzical look. "Why are you still standing there? Come on, let's go," Phoebe said as she gestured for Kevin to walk with her toward the large staircase. As Kevin and Phoebe walked through the main showroom to the front door, the customers and employees watched them with interest, wondering what they could have been meeting about. When Kevin got back to Corwin Tower, Lily wasn't home yet. Kevin didn't think much about this and went straight into the study. He took out the bracelet and compared it with the illustrations in the book that he'd borrowed from Phoebe. Finally, he found what he was looking for. While he'd been focusing on herbal medications which could often have the same effects and benefits as modern medicine, certain stones and crystals were claimed to help increase those effects. The information in the books was pretty old, but Kevin couldn't deny that he had felt a lot more focused while holding the bracelet. According to one of the books, this was probably from the tourmaline stone, which he and everyone else had originally mistaken for an emerald. He was still kicking himself over that gaffe. The next 5 days seemed to pass in the blink of an eye. During this time, Kevin went to his office at Williams Media every day. In the evenings, he would return to his penthouse at Corwin Tower and prepare dinner for Lily. After that, the two of them would take a leisurely walk around the neighborhood or in the park. Under the seemingly calm surface, the relationship between Kevin and Lily was quickly warming up. Finally, the huge economic turmoil that had been stirred up by the Williams family ended on the 8th day. It was obvious that, although the Williams family had gathered a lot of forces to help them, faced with the backing that Kevin had gotten from Tyler and the Orion Group, their attempt was doomed to fail.
"I'm glad it's finally over," Mitchell Cook said as he let out a heavy sigh.
"That really wasn't easy," Adriana said as she rubbed her eyes.
"That's an understatement," Emo said wearily. "Even though we won, we had some pretty heavy losses."
It had been an expensive battle for both sides. In the end, there weren't many casualties, but the total funds that the William family and Kevin's associate had poured into the fight exceeded $30 billion. The fight hadn't been without its risks. If any of them had made the slightest mistake, they would have been eaten alive by their competitors. They'd originally planned to sink $120 million into taking us down, even though it meant sacrificing themselves, Kevin said as he put down his coffee cup. There was no joy on his face. Instead, he looked a little wistful. "Mitch, now we can put our plan into action." "Kevin, what plan do you and Mitch have in mind?" Adriana asked with a puzzled look on her face.
"We've been planning this for a while," Cook explained. "We're going to open the largest hotel in Chicago and at the same time take over the city's catering industry."
"That's a fantastic idea. Kevin, is there anything you need our help with?" Adriana volunteered. "Not yet, thanks. We'll be happy to join forces with you later, but we've all suffered a lot lately. You, Emo, and Gilbert should take some time to help your companies recover," Kevin said thoughtfully. Adriana and the others nodded in agreement when they heard him say this. A few Chicago companies hadn't survived the financial battle that had just ripped through the local economy. 3 days later, the whole city of Chicago was buzzing with the latest news. The Salix Leaf Hotel broke ground with much fanfare. The ceremony was attended by Mitchell Cook, the owner of the Witzler Hotel, Adriana Wright, the president of the West Chicago International Group, Gilbert Rhodes, the owner of the Chartreuse Mill Bar, Emo Squire, a leader in the private security industry, and Sandra Wilson, the chief of staff at Williams Media. Everyone in Chicago knew that these people had helped the city to survive the recent economic crisis. Even though no one knew who the CEO of Salix Leaf Hotel was, judging from the distinguished attendees, they knew that it was someone very powerful. The highest-ranking dignitaries and government officials were also there to congratulate them. The most excited attendee was the new vice president and general manager of the Salix Leaf Hotel, Rachel Butcher, who had decided to go by her maiden name, Rachel Collins. It seemed that the local media outlets were interviewing her constantly. The entire complex was planned to take up over 10 city blocks. Over the next 2 years, the corporation would build luxury hotels and apartments for a cost of at least $3 billion. Within a day, the Willow Leaf Corporation became a household name, and Rachel's net worth skyrocketed too. She was suddenly one of the most influential people in Chicago, and she was attracting the attention of a lot of movers and shakers. That night, after Lily called Kevin, she returned home with Rachel. "Oh, Rachel is here! Quick, sit down so we can talk," Dorothy greeted her warmly. "I really never expected you to be the vice president of the new hotel. If you make any connections, don't forget to include Lily." "Don't flatter me, Dorothy. I'm really just working for someone else," Rachel said modestly. "That's okay," Dorothy said happily. Just then, Lily touched Rachel on the shoulder. "Tell me honestly, how did you get to know someone so important?" Lily was well aware of Rachel's family background. It must have been difficult for her to suddenly be dealing with all these rich and powerful people like Mitchell Cook. "What important person? It's just that the CEO thinks highly of me." Rachel struggled to explain as a look of panic flashed across her eyes. Without Kevin's permission, Rachel could never reveal his identity. "Oh, really? When will you introduce me to your boss?" Lily teased. No problem. I'll introduce you to him as soon as I have the time," Rachel said with an awkward smile. Kevin slowly pushed the door open and entered the room. Rachel began to stand up when she saw him, but was stopped when he shot her a quick look that reminded her to not let on that he was her boss. "You're back already?" Lily asked with a smile. "Yes." Kevin nodded and looked around the room. "When did Rachel get here? You guys keep chatting. I'm a little tired, so I think I'll go upstairs to rest." Rachel breathed a sigh of relief that she hadn't revealed Kevin's secret, but she didn't know how much longer she could keep it up. The evening after the groundbreaking for the Salix Leaf Hotel, Lily and Rachel went home and spent some time chatting with Dorothy. Rachel was excited to be the vice president of Kevin's new company, but it was awkward to talk about her job without mentioning Kevin. When he came in, she got even more nervous and couldn't relax until he finally went upstairs. But Dorothy was unhappy that Kevin hadn't been a better host and complained to Lily. "Did you see that? Rachel came to visit and he didn't even bother to offer her something, not even a piece of fruit." "Oh, Dorothy, it's no big deal. I'm not even hungry," Rachel replied pleasantly. But Dorothy's attitude was very distressing for her because of how grateful she was to Kevin for her new job. Dorothy wanted Kevin to wash fruit for her? If only she knew how powerful he really was. "Then I'll go get you something to drink. How about some water?" Dorothy said very enthusiastically. Now that Rachel had moved up the corporate ladder, Dorothy naturally wanted to get in her good graces. Meanwhile, Kevin was lying on the bed using his phone to surf for more information on healing stones that might increase the effectiveness of his herbal medicine. Suddenly, Lily opened the door and asked him expectantly, "Kevin, there's an event we've been invited to the day after tomorrow. Do you want to go?" "What event?" Kevin asked curiously. "The Jones family lost a lot during that whole mess caused by the Williams family. So the Blair family is getting together more than a dozen wealthy families to invest in a huge high-end real estate development," Lily explained. "Are you sure you want me to go along?" Kevin asked in confusion. He didn't like to have anything to do with these people, but not because he didn't like to socialize. It was just that they ran in different circles. "Now that I have 60% of the Jones Company shares, I'm going to represent the family. Since you're my husband, it's only right that you should be there too," Lily told him. "Come on, we've never gone camping like this," Lily pleaded. "How could I say no? When do we head up there?" Kevin asked enthusiastically. "Tomorrow," Lily started to say, then she looked at the clothes Kevin was wearing and said, Do you think you could change your clothes? Now that you have a good job, I'm sure you could afford to get something nicer. There's no reason for you to go around dressed in rags." "But isn't it just a camping trip? You really want me to get new clothes to go camping?" Kevin protested. Lily sighed and replied, "Yup. Anyway, you won't have anything to do but be my arm candy. After all, it's my business trip." "All right. I guess I can pretend I'm your gopher. I can get you sparkling water, carry your bags, things like that," Kevin joked as he put down his phone. "Don't tell me you want people to go back to calling you a freeloader." But just as she said this, Lily caught herself. "I'm sorry, Kevin, I shouldn't have said that." "That's okay. Anyway, you're my wife. You can say whatever you want to me," Kevin said casually. It didn't hurt his feelings at all. "Then let's go right now," Lily said excitedly as she smiled and took Kevin's hand. So they headed out to go shopping together. The problem was, Kevin just wasn't used to wearing fancy clothes. He preferred casual wear. Not only was it cheaper, but it was also a lot more comfortable. Finally, after making Lily roll her eyes in frustration at least a dozen times, Kevin had no choice but to give in. He ended up buying 2 short-sleeve shirts, some pants, and 3 jackets. When he got to the register, the associate scanned the items, then smugly looked Kevin up and down before saying, "The total is $1,832. Cash or credit?" Kevin took a deep breath and reluctantly said, "Credit." "Wait a minute," Lily suddenly said as she grabbed Kevin's hand. "We've been married for how long? And I've never bought you anything. This is on me." When he heard this, Kevin smiled broadly and said, "If you insist." The next morning, as the sun was starting to rise over Lake Michigan, the Blair family sent a car to pick up Lily and Kevin at Corwin Tower. After about 2 hours, the caravan of over a dozen limousines stopped at their destination up near Rockford. "So this is where you plan to build?" Kevin whispered to Lily as they got out of the limo. "Yes. Isn't it beautiful? It cost a little over $200 million for the land. Then each family is going to spend another $45 million for the construction costs," Lily replied with a smile. Kevin shook his head when he heard her say this. He didn't think that it was a good place for a luxury housing development. There was a river nearby which was picturesque, but he wondered if anyone had even looked into the chance of flooding. As Kevin was thinking about this, he heard a familiar, annoying voice. "Kevin, what are you doing here? Did Lily finally let you out of the house?" Jason said with disdain. Lily had more status in the Jones family, but Jason still looked down on Kevin. Of course, this brought on whispering from the other guests. They were wondering if Kevin was the worthless freeloader Jason had been talking about. "Isn't that obvious? He must have tagged along with his wife to get free food and drinks," Jason sneered. "Otherwise, he could never afford to take part in a high-end camping trip like this." They all burst into laughter. Kevin glared at Jason but didn't say anything. It was better to ignore him. However, this teasing made Lily very unhappy. "Jason, what do you mean by that? We all came out here to have fun. If you pick another fight with Kevin, don't blame me for what happens to you." "Lily's right, Jason. You really talk too much," Matilda reminded him. As she said this, she gave Kevin a little nod. Jason just grumbled and walked away. By now, a lot of them had already started to set up their tents. Of course, some of them wouldn't lower themselves to do manual labor, so they just sat in the shade on lawn chairs and watched. Most of the people on the camping trip were young. They were the future of the various companies involved in the business venture, and what they were interested in most of all was networking. But they were all distracted by the sight of Lily and Matilda Jones when they changed into their camping outfits. They were the most attractive women there. Suddenly, a man walked up to Lily and said, "Hi, Miss Jones. My name is Doug Butler. I've been hearing about you for a long time, and I'm so glad to finally meet you." When he heard the man say his name, Kevin did a spit take and couldn't help laughing. "What's your name? Doug Butt? Who gave you a name like that?" "What are you laughing at, you bum?" Butler growled. Nothing," Kevin said as he casually waved his hand, but he still couldn't hold back his laughter. "What the hell? Why are you still laughing at me?" he shouted again. "Tell me, what the hell is so funny?" "I just think your name's a little funny," Kevin said with a smile. When they heard Kevin say this, everyone started to mutter Doug Butler's name. Pretty soon, everyone in the group started laughing. Butler rolled up his sleeves and snarled, "How about if I wipe that smile off your face?" Just as Butler was about to attack Kevin, Lily stepped between the two men and said, "Mr. Butler, please, don't be angry. We're all here to enjoy ourselves. Let's just relax and have a good time." Butler looked at Lily and calmed down a little. Then he turned to Kevin and warned him, "As a favor to your wife, I'll let you off this time. But if you do it again, I'll break your friggin' legs." Kevin just gave him a blank stare. He didn't want to upset Lily, but he clearly remembered that when Jason mocked him earlier, Butler had also joined in, and he had been the one who laughed the loudest. Now that the guy was hitting on Lily, Kevin wasn't going to give him a pass. Right at that moment, Kevin heard a lot of commotion and turned around to see Officer Emmett and Phoebe Anderson walking out of a changing room. But to everyone's surprise, the two women went straight to Kevin. "I really didn't expect you guys to get here so quickly," Phoebe said while smiling at Kevin. Lily noticed Phoebe looking at Kevin and suddenly felt uncomfortable. "Kevin, I didn't expect you to be here either," Officer Emmett said as she stood there with her hands on her hips. "Why didn't you tell us? We could have ridden together." "Oh, I don't know about that. Remember what happened the last time we took a drive together," Kevin replied. Officer Emmett knew he was talking about chasing the bank robbers in his sports car. Lily wasn't sure what to think when she heard them talking like this. In fact, everyone was surprised to hear them teasing each other and acting like old friends. How did this freeloader have such a close relationship with these two beautiful women? Blair walked up to Officer Emmett and said very bitterly, "Kelly, you might not know, but Lily is now at the helm of the Jones family business. Kevin only came on this camping trip because of her." As he said this, Blair made sure he gave Kevin a snotty look. "What are you talking about? Do you have to make things so awkward?" Officer Emmett said in an irritated tone. In her eyes, Kevin was a brave and fearless hero. He was way stronger than any of these useless rich posers. "Kelly, why are you still standing up for him? You're my fiancé," Blair said anxiously. "I'm just being honest. Also, if you keep acting like this, you may not call me that much longer," Officer Emmett said as she gave him a cold stare. Blair immediately dropped his tough guy act. Okay, Kelly, whatever you say." But he still gave Kevin another dirty look. His father, Neil Blair, suddenly stood up and interrupted them, saying, "Thank you all very much for coming on this camping trip. I'll be brief. Have a good time and be careful." Then he added, "This is a great place to get in touch with the outdoors. You can fish down by the river, and there's small game out in the woods. It will be up to you to find your food over the next few days. We'll provide drinks and snacks. Just grab whatever you need and enjoy yourselves." As Neil Blair finished talking, everyone smiled. They were all from wealthy families, and they already knew how to eat, drink, and have fun. They immediately broke up into cliques. Some picked up fishing rods to go fishing by the river. Others got ready to head into the woods to hunt for small game. And there were a few who had started drinking and hanging out. After all, the main goal of this outing was to make friends and get to know each other. Phoebe suddenly asked, "Kevin, are we hunting or fishing?" "This is the best part of the fall hunting season. There should be a lot of small game in the woods," Kevin said as he went over to the table and picked up a sharp hunting knife. "But why don't we go fishing? The fish must be nice and plump," Officer Emmett asked. "We'd do better at a lake. The current's too fast down by the river. The fish would be swept away before they had any chance to bite. And it's illegal to fish with a net around here. Of course, we could all afford the fine, but it just wouldn't be sportsmanlike," Kevin replied plainly. "So what you're saying is none of those guys will be able to catch a fish?" Blair said mockingly. If Officer Emmett hadn't been there, Blair definitely wouldn't have been hanging out with Kevin. "I didn't say absolutely," Kevin explained. "Then why are you so serious? Are you just bragging?" Blair scoffed. Kevin ignored him. He turned around and said to Lily, "Let's head into the woods and see if we can catch a wild rabbit." Lily nodded in agreement. She didn't want to stay here and feel everyone's eyes on her. "Let's go," Phoebe said as she smiled and picked up a wicker basket. Then Blair stood up and announced to everyone, "Why don't we have a competition and see who catches the most fish or game?" Someone in the crowd agreed. "So what's the reward?" "Good idea. Each family will put $10 million in the pot. Winner takes all," Blair said casually. This caused an uproar. A lot of them wanted to participate, but $10 million was a lot of money. How many of them could bet that much just for fun? Blair sneered at Kevin and Lily. His goal was clear. He was goading them to play his game. Blair had already sent some of his people ahead to set things up. The Jones family was guaranteed to lose, and he'd put Kevin in his place. "Jason, will the Jones family participate?" Blair asked with a sneer. Lily wasn't pleased to hear this. She was the leader of the Jones family now, and this game involved a huge amount of money. Why did Blair ask Jason instead of her? "We'll think about it," Jason replied, but he didn't agree immediately. "What? Can't you make a decision by yourself? It's just $10 million. Don't tell me your family's so poor that you can't scrape that much together. Or are you as useless as the guy who married into your family?" Blair sneered. Kevin frowned and thought to himself, "What's with this guy? Why does everything have to do with me? It's not like I did anything to him." Kevin could tell that Blair was purposely provoking Jason. As expected, Jason took the bait and said, "Don't worry, we can still afford $10 million. Then Jason turned to Lily and said, "Since Mr. Blair has kindly invited us, should we join the game?" Blair frowned when he heard the Joneses start talking with each other about Jason's response. They all knew that the decision was up to Lily. While they didn't want to back down, they also knew $10 million was a lot of money. Jason wasn't happy about this either. He thought of himself as the family representative, but as long as Lily held most of the shares in the company, he was no longer in the limelight. On the other hand, if Lily went along with the wager and lost, Grandma Jones might force her to hand over her shares. "All right, we're in," Lily replied as she gritted her teeth. "You're braver than I thought," Blair said with a cocky smile. But Lily wasn't sure this was really a good decision. Lily and Kevin were about to go hunting in the woods when Sherwin Blair suggested that all the families play a high-stakes game. Every family would chip in $10 million. Whoever caught the most fish or game would win the pot. Lily finally agreed to let the Jones family participate. Soon the teams were decided. They were Kevin and Lily from the Jones family, Phoebe and her brother Blake representing the Andersons, Sherwin Blair and Officer Emmett from the Blair family, and then there were 6 other families too. "I'm not much into hunting or fishing, so I'll be the judge," Neil Blair said as he looked at his watch. "It's 9 a.m. and you all have 3 hours to catch as many fish or small game as you can. Be back here by noon. Good luck to all of you." Seeing that everyone else had already started to move, Lily immediately pulled on Kevin's sleeve and urged him. "Let's head up that way, into the woods." "Don't panic," Kevin said very calmly. "We just bet $10 million. What if we lose?" Lily said nervously. "We can't lose," Kevin said as his eyes swept across the forest not far away. "This is a good place to wait. If we go running recklessly into the woods, we won't catch anything. Let the other teams head in there first." Phoebe walked over with Blake and agreed. "What Kevin said makes sense. We can head into the woods a little later." She didn't know why, but when she saw Kevin and Lily together, she felt extremely uncomfortable. "It wouldn't hurt for us to wait a few minutes before going in there," Officer Emmett commented. Lily opened her mouth to speak but didn't say anything. She wasn't sure what to do. While they were waiting there, Blair sent a message to one of his relatives, who was secretly entering the woods from the other side. When Kevin and the others finally started to head into the woods, they saw some members of the Steele family picking wild berries. After about an hour, Kevin and the others had only caught a single wild rabbit, which they put in Lily's hunting basket. Suddenly, they all heard a rustling sound coming from the nearby bushes. "Did you hear that?" Blake asked with a worried look on his face. "What's that sound?" Officer Emmett asked as she gazed cautiously around their surroundings. As soon as she finished speaking, a large, ferocious cougar jumped out of the bushes and growled at them. Kevin was the first to react. "Run!" he shouted as he grabbed Lily and Phoebe's hands and pulled them in the opposite direction. "How can there be a cougar here?" Officer Emmett said with a shocked look on her face. "Let's not worry about that for now. Let's just get out of here," Kevin shouted. Their priority was to get to safety. They could answer her question later. Just then, Blair suddenly stopped and pulled a hunting knife out of his jacket. He shouted loudly, "You damn beast! Get the hell out of here!" "Sherwin!" Officer Emmett exclaimed. When everyone turned around, Blair was already standing face to face with the cougar. He waved his knife from side to side and slashed at the animal. The cougar yelped before it turned around and ran off into the woods. Kevin knew something wasn't right. He clearly noticed that the cougar was running on its hind legs. "I'm certain that was a man disguised as a cougar," Kevin thought to himself. By then, Blair had returned and was standing in front of Officer Emmett saying proudly, "Kelly, don't be afraid. As long as I'm here, nothing can hurt you, not even a cougar." Officer Emmett melted when she heard this. She thought to herself, "I never realized Sherwin was so brave. Maybe I've been wrong about him." Lily turned around and looked at Kevin. How could Blair have been so brave standing up against a cougar while Kevin just wanted to run away? This was very upsetting for her. "Lily, what's wrong? Are you still frightened?" Kevin asked with concern. He could tell that Lily was worried about something. "It's nothing," Lily sighed softly. "Since there's a cougar running around in these woods, we really ought to head back to the camp where it's safer. We should also tell the others about it so they don't get hurt," Blake said cautiously. He was still a little afraid. What is there to be afraid of? It's just a cougar. If it dares to come back, I'll kill it and we'll cook it on the spit for dinner," Blair said arrogantly. He figured that once they got back to camp, the news of him chasing away the cougar would immediately spread. They were all sure to see him differently now. Phoebe's face suddenly turned pale with fear. She raised her trembling hand and pointed behind them, saying, "Here comes another one." Everyone turned around and looked. They were almost scared to death. This cougar looked like it was almost twice the size of the first one, and it was less than 100 feet away from them. "Run!" Blake yelled as he turned around and started sprinting for the camp. "What's going on? I only have one guy dressed up like a cougar," Blair thought to himself. "Ouch!" Phoebe yelled as she suddenly fell to the ground. "What happened? Get up!" Kevin was worried this time because he was sure that this cougar was real. "I think I sprained my ankle," Phoebe said as she winced in pain. "Phoebe, we have to get out of here," Lily said in a panic. "Lily, run!" Kevin shouted as he picked Phoebe up and put her on his back. Just then, Blair shouted again, "Come on, you filthy beast!" Suddenly, he heard a voice shouting in the distance, "Sherwin, it's a real cougar! Run!" Hearing this, Sherwin Blair's face turned pale. He threw down his knife and sprinted out of the woods. As they all started to run, the cougar was triggered to see them as prey and started chasing after them. "Blair, I thought you weren't afraid," Officer Emmett asked as she was running toward the camp. "That's a real freaking cougar," Blair shouted. As he was running desperately to get away, he fell to the ground, but he didn't care about his injuries. He immediately got up from the ground and kept running through the brush. Blair ran for his life without showing any concern for his fiancée. Officer Emmett felt very helpless. Although she was a highly trained law enforcement officer with years of martial arts practice, she was completely freaked out by a wild cougar. "Kevin, just leave me behind and save yourself," Phoebe said in despair. "Bullshit. We all came in here together and we're all going to leave together. Do you think I'm going to let you face a wild animal alone?" Kevin said firmly. When Phoebe heard him say this, her eyes welled up with tears and she tightly hugged Kevin's shoulder. She had already decided that if she ever survived this catastrophe, she didn't care if Kevin was married or not. She had to be with this man, even though everyone in the Jones family said he was worthless trash. She was even willing to fight Lily for him. Phoebe didn't really care what anyone thought. Suddenly, Kevin stopped. He put Phoebe down and turned around to look at the fierce cougar that was running towards them. "Keep heading for the camp. It's that way," he shouted as he pointed through the trees. "Kevin, no," Phoebe shouted anxiously. "Go as fast as you can. I'll keep him here," Kevin yelled as he ran at the cougar without looking back. He picked up the knife that Blair had tossed on the ground and threw it at the cougar. "Come on," Kevin growled loudly. He pulled out his own hunting knife and slashed at the ferocious animal. Kevin looked like he was ready to take on 10 cougars at once. This was the last image Phoebe had of him as she limped as fast as she could toward the camp. The knife didn't hurt the beast, so Kevin picked up a rock and smashed it on the head. The cougar immediately let out what sounded more like a shriek than a roar. Without thinking about his own safety, Kevin ran towards the dense forest, away from the camp. The angry cougar quickly followed behind. Just as they reached a clearing, Kevin dropped to the ground and the cougar ran past him, smashing into a tree. Kevin immediately jumped up and leapt back into the dense forest. When Phoebe finally limped into the camp, Blake saw her and ran over to help her. "Phoebe, where's Kevin?" Lily asked anxiously when she realized that Kevin wasn't with her. Kevin, in order to save me, he lured the cougar away in the other direction," Phoebe said sadly. They all heard a wailing sound that echoed from one end of the woods to the other. That sounds like the cougar got him, they all thought. Some of the Joneses were happy to finally be rid of him. At least Phoebe had made it back. They had no sympathy for Kevin at all. No, Kevin can't die," Lily sobbed as she kept shaking her head no. unable to hold back her tears. "Kevin!" Officer Emmett's eyes were starting to tear up too. Was Kevin still alive? After Blair tried to scare everyone with someone dressed in a fairly convincing cougar costume so he could chase it away and look like a hero, a real one showed up. Kevin risked himself to lure it in another direction so everybody could get back safely to the campsite. "Which one of you is willing to follow me back into the woods to find Kevin?" Lily shouted desperately. But nobody replied. Lily sat down on the ground and started to cry loudly. It looked hopeless. Just then they heard several more shrieks coming from the mountain, but it didn't sound like it was just the cougar. Half an hour later, Officer Emmett helped Lily get up from the ground. I'll go with you into the woods. Even if it's too late for Kevin, we can't leave him behind." "Kelly, are you kidding?" Blair said to her. "There are cougars out there." He reached out to try to stop her. "I'm a police officer. Kevin just did what I should have done," she replied sternly. "Now get out of my way." "Kelly!" Blair said angrily. He couldn't believe that Officer Emmett would take such a big risk for such a useless person. "I'll go too," Phoebe said as she walked up to Lily. She was still a little unstable because of her ankle, but her brother Blake was helping to support her. "Kevin got into this because he was trying to save me." "Phoebe, no," Blake said with a worried frown. "Blake, Dad taught us to not let our friends down," Phoebe said stubbornly. "Okay, I'll go with you too," Blake said resolutely as he gritted his teeth. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, Kevin was standing over a dead timber rattlesnake. "You sneaky bastard," Kevin said angrily. He looked pretty miserable. Half of his body was covered in blood. While he was fighting with the cougar, it had clawed him a couple of times. Then, after he chased the cougar away, he sat on the ground to catch his breath. That's when a timber rattlesnake suddenly appeared by his feet. Normally, he would have just walked away since they don't usually bother with humans, but it had probably been riled by his fight with the cougar and felt threatened. Even though he was pretty exhausted, Kevin was still quick enough, thanks to the herbal medicine in his system, to grab the snake before it was able to sink its teeth into him. He cracked its spine just below the head like it was a chicken. About 10 minutes later, Lily, Officer Emmett, and Phoebe finally convinced more than a dozen people to go into the woods to look for Kevin. Their jaws dropped when they saw him walking towards them holding a 6-foot-long timber rattlesnake. "I've got something for your hunting basket, Lily," Kevin said with a weary smile. Lily shouted happily and was the first to run towards Kevin. She hugged him tightly. Half an hour earlier, Lily really thought that she'd lost Kevin forever. Even though her family thought he was useless, he'd always been very good to her. It was only now that Lily understood that somehow Kevin had become so important to her and she had fallen in love with him. "Don't worry, Lily. I'm okay," Kevin tried his best to comfort her. "If you keep crying, your makeup will start to run." But Lily acted like she couldn't hear him. She buried her head in Kevin's chest and cried her eyes out. "Give me a hand, guys," Kevin said with a smile. None of them could believe what they were seeing. Was this the guy Jason had told everyone was such a loser? More than 100 people stared at Kevin in disbelief. "Now, Lily, if you keep crying, I'm going to start crying too," Kevin said gently as he tried to comfort her. Who's crying?" Lily said as she stepped back and wiped the tears from her face. "Kevin!" Officer Emmett and Phoebe shouted in unison as they walked over to him. Are you all right?" Phoebe asked very nervously. "Look at me. Do I look all right?" Kevin asked as he opened his arms wide to show his bloody shredded shirt. "Between that cougar and this snake, I almost didn't make it back here." Right then, a man walked up to Kevin and patted his shoulder. "Amazing! You fought with a cougar and then killed a rattlesnake with your bare hands." Then the man suddenly turned around and faced the crowd. "Someone said that you're just trash. Nonsense." He said this in a very loud voice as if he didn't care if he offended anyone. To Kevin's surprise, Blair, Jason, and the others didn't say a word. They just stood there in shocked silence. "Hi, my name is Dalton Steele. I could certainly use a friend like you," he said. Then he held out his hand to Kevin. "My name's Kevin.
he replied as they shook hands. After all the ridicule he'd put up with from the Jones family and their friends, it was nice to have someone treat him like he deserved. A lot of them were jealous to see Dalton being so friendly to Kevin. But what Kevin didn't know was that Dalton was the only heir to the Steele family business. His grandfather, Norman Steele, had arrived in Chicago 50 years before and grown his business from the ground up with all his hard work. Up until now, the Steele family's holdings included some legitimate businesses and lots of entertainment facilities. They also had a strong reputation in the Chicago underworld. Nowadays, Norman Steele no longer cared much about the family's business, so he transferred all of his authority to Dalton. Even Drake and Dominic Archer respected the man. "I'm really lucky to have made friends with Dalton," Blair muttered to himself. Nobody was a good enough cook to prepare dinner, so the Blair family had arranged for a professional chef to come to the campsite. Then Butler had a couple more chefs take the rattlesnake that Kevin had caught to cook it for everyone to taste. Soon everyone broke into groups and started chatting with each other, but they didn't dare go back into the woods. Dalton found a place to treat Kevin's wounds. After talking for just a short time, they seemed to feel an instant connection.
"Kevin, what do you think of this piece of land?"
Dalton suddenly asked him. "Are you interested in real estate?" Kevin said with a smile.
"Not really, I just like this property. It's a great place to get in touch with nature. It would be a shame to develop it and put up mansions," Dalton said with some regret.
"I agree. You could put up a nature preserve here," Kevin replied as his eyes swept across the clearing in the forest. Such a large forest, it would be a pity to cut it down for development. Dalton's wife, Miranda, interrupted them to say that she wanted to take a walk along the river.
"Kevin, I'm going to take a stroll with my wife. Let's chat some more when I get back,"
Dalton said as he put his arm around his wife's shoulder and walked off. "Okay," Kevin agreed with a smile. Miranda also gave Kevin a friendly nod as she turned around and left. She was wearing a simple white top and a green dragon tattoo was faintly visible on her back. She walked with an air of confidence. None of the men dared to look at Miranda Steele as she walked to the river with her husband. They didn't have the guts to risk getting Dalton mad. Officer Emmett and Phoebe followed Lily to Kevin's side. "Kevin, please tell us, how did you drive that ferocious cougar away?" Phoebe asked curiously. "And how did you kill that timber rattlesnake? It was humongous." Lily and Officer Emmett were also very curious to know. They knew that no ordinary person could do what he did. And no one there knew Kevin better than Officer Emmett. She knew that he'd gotten a lot stronger and more focused thanks to the herbal medicine he'd been experimenting with, but it still couldn't have been easy to fight both of those wild animals one after the other. "I was just lucky," Kevin said modestly. "After that cougar chased me into the forest, the rattlesnake came out of nowhere. The two of them started fighting and I just picked up the scraps." Some people overheard this and decided Kevin wasn't that heroic after all. They went back to mocking him and laughing out loud. Blair glared at Kevin. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly heard a cry of surprise. "Everyone, come and look! Something just happened!" As soon as he finished speaking, Kevin saw Dalton running towards them carrying Miranda in his arms.
"Is there a doctor here?"
he asked anxiously.
"Hurry up and get over here."
Miranda was lifeless and kept spitting up saliva. She was having trouble breathing and her body was trembling.
"What the hell is going on?" Dalton asked.
A group formed around them trying to figure out what was happening. Just then, a man stepped out of the crowd and knelt down next to Dalton. He introduced himself. "Hello, Mr. Steele. My name is Ivan Daniels. I graduated from medical school."
"I don't need your life story. Hurry up," Dalton interrupted him. "Can you help her? What's going on?"
Hearing this, Ivan's expression immediately showed his irritation. He would never dare to provoke Dalton Steele. On top of that, he wanted to curry favor with the Steele family, so he just smiled and continued checking Miranda's vitals. Finally, Ivan shook his head. "Mr. Steele, your wife's condition is very serious. I don't think she has more than an hour to live."
"Bullshit! If you don't know what you're doing, then get the hell out of here!"
Dalton shouted at the young doctor. "But Mr. Steele, I'm telling you the truth. There's nothing I can do," Ivan reluctantly told him. Dalton looked over at Blair and asked him, "What the hell are you guys going to do? Didn't you make arrangements for an ambulance?" Sherwin Blair broke out in a cold sweat. "Mr. Steele, don't be upset. I'll call for an ambulance right away," he stammered. Blair was usually very arrogant and he always had a nasty look on his face, but in front of someone as important as Dalton Steele, he could kiss butt as well as anyone. Kevin suddenly squeezed through the crowd. "Don't waste your time. This place is too far away from the nearest hospital. She'd be gone before an ambulance even got here."
"Kevin, what do you mean by that? Can you save my wife?"
Dalton said hopefully. Before Kevin could say anything, Lily grabbed him by the arm and quickly pulled him back. "Mr. Steele, please don't misunderstand. Kevin doesn't have any medical training," Lily said in a panic. She was worried that Dalton would ask Kevin to save his wife. Lily had been married to Kevin for 3 years and she still didn't know him that well, but she knew that she had never seen Kevin treat anyone. More importantly, Miranda was Dalton's wife. They couldn't risk ticking off the Steele family. "Dalton, don't worry," Kevin started to say. But Lily interrupted him. "Kevin, don't be silly." Lily was getting angry with her husband. "Don't worry, Lily. I know what I'm doing," Kevin said as he calmly patted her hand. Then Kevin walked over to the man and asked him, "Dalton, tell me, did Miranda eat anything in the woods?" Kevin had clearly noticed something yellow around Miranda's mouth.
"Did she eat something?" Dalton asked. "Let me think."
He scratched the back of his head while he tried to remember. Then he said,
"Just now, while we were walking along the river, I found a pear on a tree, so I plucked it for her."
After hearing Dalton's answer, Kevin nearly laughed out loud. He had also noticed that tree. It wasn't a pear, but it was a fruit that was very important in concocting herbal medications. Kevin remembered reading about it in his herbal guides. It was very similar to what some people call the apple of death because it's so poisonous. What was surprising was that they shouldn't even be growing this far north. "I can help you, Dalton," Kevin said. Then he turned to the doctor and said, "Didn't you notice that she'd eaten something poisonous? I saw some roots growing by the woods that could help her. In the meantime, you need to wash her skin thoroughly and give her an antihistamine." Before Dalton could say anything, the bystanders started doubting Kevin and they began to warn him not to listen to Kevin. Butler and Blair were the worst of them. Now Dalton wasn't sure what to do, so he turned to Ivan Daniels and asked him,
"So, does this make sense to you?"
They all waited to hear what the doctor had to say. Dalton carried his wife back from the river and she was in bad shape. Dr. Daniels didn't think there was anything he could do for her, but Kevin realized she'd eaten a poisoned fruit from one of the trees. He told the doctor what he should do, but Blair and some of the others didn't believe him. Kevin remained calm in the face of Blair and Butler's clamoring. He slowly turned around and said, "Since the two of you are shouting so loudly, I suppose you have a way to save her? I'll gladly step aside and let the both of you get to work." "Are you deliberately causing trouble?" Blair said angrily.
"How do we know you aren't just trying to trick us?"
Butler asked rudely. "In other words, the two of you have no idea what to do," Kevin retorted. "If you don't understand, then please stay out of this." Dalton suddenly said,
"Kevin's right. If any of you say another word, I'll throw you into the river."
As soon as he said this, everyone became silent. Butler and Blair immediately clammed up. Neither of them wanted to test Dalton. After that, Dalton turned around and stared at Kevin. He said in a very grave tone,
"Kevin, I believe you. What do you think we should do?"
"Okay." Kevin nodded and gazed around the campground. "Dalton, take a couple of people over to those plants down by the river, where the ground's a little marshy. Bring back a couple of those tall plants, the ones with the large leaves. Make sure you pull up the roots, too." Then Kevin turned to the doctor and asked him, "Do you have your medical bag in the tent? Please bring it right back." He picked up Miranda and put her on a blanket on the ground. Some of the onlookers wanted to complain when they saw Kevin touching Miranda, but they were too intimidated by Dalton to say anything. After Dalton walked away to look for the plants, Lily came over to Kevin and whispered to him, "Kevin, don't press your luck. Please let go of Miranda and apologize to Dalton." "Don't worry, Lily. I know what I'm doing, Kevin reassured her. How could you possibly know what you're doing? I know for damn sure you're not a doctor, Lily said anxiously. My family can't afford to get on Dalton's bad side. Ivan came back with his medical supplies and Kevin helped him to clean Miranda's skin around her mouth. Then the doctor got an antihistamine ready. When Dalton came back with the plants a moment later, the doctor asked him, Has your wife ever had a bad reaction to an antihistamine or any other medication? Lily got very worried by all of this and said to Dalton, I'm not sure that Kevin has the training for this. You really should call the hospital right away. Lily was very frightened that if Miranda died, Dalton would blame her family for it. I agree, the doctor said. This treatment is highly irregular. Please, Dalton, we all know that Kevin is faking it. You should get her to a hospital right away, Blair said nervously. And what do you think those plants are going to do? I wouldn't even put them in a salad, Butler scoffed. All right, all of you shut up, Dalton said impatiently. I know what you're all thinking. You're afraid that Kevin will kill my wife and I'll take it out on you. Don't worry. The doctor already said she couldn't make it to the hospital in time, so this is our only option right now. Then he looked at all of them and added, We're in such a remote place. If we wait for an ambulance, it might be too late by the time they get here. So we'll just have to trust Kevin. And don't worry, I won't blame any of you. When he said this, they all heaved a sigh of relief. As long as Dalton wouldn't hold it against them, then Kevin could do whatever he wanted. Lily was stunned to hear this. Then she remembered how Phoebe had trusted Kevin in the antique shop, even though she still had doubts about her own husband. And now Dalton trusted Kevin with his own wife's life, even though he'd only known him for less than 3 hours. Lily had been married to Kevin for 3 years and still doubted him. Maybe I really don't understand him, Lily thought to herself. Then Dalton asked Kevin, Now what are we going to do with these plants? Kevin took the plants from Dalton's hands and stepped away as the doctor continued to treat Miranda. I need to go over to the chef station to make an herbal remedy that will help her recover more quickly, Kevin said very calmly. You know how to make herbal medicine? Dalton said in shock. Of course the onlookers didn't believe him either and started to mock him for claiming to have this skill. After all, he was just a freeloader in the Jones family. But Kevin just ignored them and calmly went about his work. Officer Emmett stared at Kevin in shock. She'd already taken one of Kevin's herbal meds, and so had Blair, but she didn't realize that he could make them himself. So, Kevin, did you study herbal medicine while you were living off the Jones family for the last 3 years? Jason said mockingly. But Kevin didn't care about what they were all saying. He started to use the cooking utensils that the chefs had set up by the main tent. After he was done, Kevin turned his head and pointed at Jason, Ivan, Butler, and Blair and said, Take off your clothes. I need to start a fire. Even though Officer Emmett had warned Kevin not to show off his skills in front of anyone, he couldn't help but make a spectacle of himself at Jason and Blair's expense. What did you say? Jason asked anxiously. Why don't you burn your own clothes? Blair protested. The men saw that Dalton wasn't pleased with their reluctance to help. Kevin, don't you stir up trouble again, Jason said angrily. Kevin smiled and replied, All right, I'll just tell Dalton that you aren't interested in helping. Okay, they're only clothes, Blair said as he gritted his teeth and took off his shirt. He was impressed that Kevin had maneuvered him into this position. Nobody wanted to disappoint someone like Dalton. After Blair took the lead, Jason and the other two also took off their shirts and pants. Some of the onlookers snickered when they saw them standing there in their boxers. So now what do you plan to do? Blair sneered. Kevin didn't reply. He just picked up the clothes Jason and the others had thrown on the ground and asked for a lighter. Then he set them on fire. The onlookers all mumbled to each other as they tried to figure out what Kevin was doing. Kevin, do you even really know what you're doing? Blair said with a sneer. Kevin looked Blair right in the eyes and said, Just be a little patient and you might learn something. Do you think we're 3-year-old kids who don't know anything? Blair said with disdain. Kevin ignored Blair and kept stoking the fire. What he was concerned with was having a steady flame so he could put the roots in the fire and heat them evenly. He'd remember most of what he'd read in his guides on herbal medicine preparation. This was something he was sure of. He'd really gotten very good at this in an incredibly short time. Since he couldn't get a reaction out of Kevin, Jason turned to Phoebe and asked her rudely,
"You're well educated, aren't you? Can't you see that Kevin's making a fool of himself?"
Everyone turned and looked at Phoebe to see how she would react. Jason continued his rant.
"Kevin, let's see how long you can keep pretending you know what you're doing. And now Phoebe and Lily will see your true colors. Then you can explain yourself to Dalton."
Phoebe shrugged her shoulders and said, "All I know is that a lot of medicines have the same ingredients as natural plants." Then she continued, "But I'm not exactly sure what Kevin is doing right now." The onlookers thought that what she said had made sense. Still, some of them thought he was just putting on an act to look important. Kevin ignored their criticism and kept staring intently at the burning fire. By now, some people couldn't help glancing over at Dalton to see how he was going to respond. But his expression didn't change at all. He just sat quietly on the ground, hugging Miranda tightly. Phoebe started to get anxious for Kevin and added, "There's one thing I forgot to say. Some remedies have been passed down orally, so they can't be found in any books." Before she could finish speaking, Jason interrupted her.
"Phoebe, you don't need to defend him."
Just then, the roots that Kevin was holding in the fire started to crackle. He pulled them from the flame and took them back over to the chef's table where he made shavings and placed them in a bowl with some water. They could all smell the sweet fragrance, although the only one who was going to consume the concoction was Miranda. Everyone immediately became quiet. They were so shocked that their jaws almost dropped. "So, it's ready?" one of them asked, breaking the awkward silence. Kevin put some of the mixture in a glass and handed it to Dalton. "She should be able to sip some of this by now. It will help her to recover a lot more quickly than what the doctor just gave her."
"Thank you, Kevin,"
Dalton said excitedly as he headed over to his wife, who was still lying on the blanket. Dalton had been quiet until now because he didn't want to risk distracting Kevin. He still had some doubts about the remedy, and it would be awful to have it fail because he'd interrupted Kevin. Nobody could believe that Kevin had prepared something to help Miranda just from what was growing around the campsite. Lily stared at Kevin in amazement, and seeing that this might just work, she finally relaxed a little. But it still bothered her that she didn't know Kevin or trust him yet. Officer Emmett walked over to him and asked him in disbelief, "So you really know how to make herbal remedies? Then you actually made that pill that you gave me?" Kevin didn't answer her right away. He just shrugged his shoulders and walked over to see how Miranda was doing. Everyone was watching anxiously, wondering when she would show some signs that the cure was working.